Today is Labor Day. Maybe you are spending time hanging out by the pool. Maybe you are playing with your kids or going to the movie. I hope it's a relaxing day for you. But in our chapter today, it is not at all relaxing for the Apostle Paul. If you've missed the devotions last week, what we saw happen was the Apostle Paul getting arrested in Jerusalem. First, he speaks to the commander in Greek, which was the language of the educated people, and said, "I'd like to address the crowd." So then chapter 22 begins with Paul addressing this crowd that had just been beating him up, this crowd that wanted him to die. And to them he speaks Aramaic, which was the language of the people in Israel at the time. And he shares his testimony. He tells them how he was raised a Jew and how he even persecuted the church. And then he tells his experience on the Damascus Road where he met Jesus. They listen to every word until he gets down to the point and said, "God is sent me far away to the Gentiles." That's verse 21. They listened until he said the word Gentile. The Jewish people hated the Gentiles. They were so prejudiced. At that point, they shouted, "Rid the earth of this man. He is not fit to live." And they start throwing their cloaks off and flinging dust into the air. You would take off your cloak if you wanted to stone someone. And that's what they wanted. They wanted Paul to die. And all of that leads us up to today's brief passage. Beginning in verse 24 of Acts chapter 22, the commander gets involved. He takes Paul and orders him to go into the barracks and be flogged. Now, remember what flogging is. This is what they did to Jesus before his crucifixion. They would strip you naked, they would stretch you out, and with a whip, they would then inflict blow after blow. Bits of metal and bone were embedded in the leather. Sometimes people would die from flogging. But the commander ordered it because he wanted to figure out why the people hated Paul so much. Verse 25 says they had Paul stretched out. The centurion is just about ready to say, "Go, start whipping." Paul waited until the last minute to drop this little bit of truth on them. He said, "Is it legal for you to flog a Roman citizen who has not even been found guilty?" Remember, Paul is a Roman citizen, and it was illegal for a Roman citizen to be flogged or scourged. The centurion was alarmed, and he reported it to the commander and said, "What are you about to do? This guy's a Roman citizen." Now they're concerned for themselves. The commander asked Paul, "Are you really a Roman citizen?" Paul said, "Yes, I am." The commander said, verse 28, "I had to pay a lot of money for my citizenship." Actually, you could not buy Roman citizenship. What that probably meant was he bribed some government officials to get citizenship. Paul said, "I was born a citizen." And so the commander was alarmed when he realized how close he came to having Paul flogged. And that's where our devotion concludes. Paul goes to Jerusalem. He gets arrested. He gets beaten by a crowd. He's this close to being flogged, all because he was following God's will. Does that strike you as odd? I thought if we followed God's will, it meant everything in our life would be perfect and wonderful, and we would be wealthy and healthy, and no one would be angry with us. God's will is ultimately for our good and his glory. But that does not mean that following God is without challenges or persecution. Paul said in 1 Corinthians 16, verse 9, "A wide open door of effective service has been opened to me." That would be God's will, an open door. Then he said, "But there are many adversaries." Just because you have opposition in your life, just because you have pushback, doesn't mean it's not God's will. Sometimes people experience opposition and they think, oh, that must be a closed door. God doesn't want me to do this. Sometimes God's will also comes with opposition. But if you will obey and if you will stay faithful, the good news is, in the end, it will be good for you and it will bring God glory. Because Paul made it to Rome. Remember, his dream was to go to Rome and bring the gospel to Rome. He would get there, but he would get there as a Roman prisoner. He would get there aboard a ship. As we see in the coming chapters, there would be a shipwreck. But all along the way, people are hearing about Jesus. He got to Rome, just not the way he expected, in chains as a prisoner via shipwreck. So don't give up just because things are hard in your life right now. Don't give up just because you have opposition. Don't think it's not God's will because things have gotten difficult. It may very well be that you're in the center of God's will, and if you will push through, you'll see the blessing on the other side. My neighbor's using a power saw. I hope that doesn't distract you. This concludes the devotion that you're watching on Labor Day. Why don't you jump in a pool if you have one and spend some time with your kids?